everybody. Thank you for letting me do this again. I'm not obviously in attendance this time. I'm in New Mexico. As I was just explaining to Carrie, this is my 6th time doing this now. And I'm now retired from UT, which has certain costs associated with it in terms of what I have access to. So I have to scramble a little more to find interesting things to show you. And so a lot of this will be things that we've actually talked about before, since this is, I imagine there are still people in the audience that were here in 2000 when I started doing these. If you weren't part of the group before, don't worry. It'll still come across. And if you need me to stop and answer questions, obviously that's fine as well. Okay. And so I've titled it this time a little provocatively. I don't mean to get political here, but it's really tough, and it's gotten harder for reasons that I'm sure you can imagine. We are on the precipice of a change in economic policy that is not exactly rooted in sort of rational economic thought. It's more about politics in many different ways, and retaliation, things like that. And so we don't really, I mean, I always say that, economists are not the best forecasters. We're trying to predict human behavior. And so when was that ever been highly predictable? Here we're in even worse shape, because we're talking about many policies that no economist would ever really advocate as a rational macroeconomic policy. And so it's a little bit, we're not exactly certain what they're going to look like in the final analysis. And we're not exactly sure what their effects will be, but we're going to do our best to try to talk about some of that. So let's get into this. And we're going to look at, as always, current trends. Labor market, something we've talked about every time. The value of the dollar plays a role in what's going on now, as it has in our talks before. We've now got to worry about import tariffs. I mean, they're coming. We know it now. Jamie Dimon told us yesterday, get over it. Right. So, as of before the election, he was entirely opposed to that sort of thing. And now they're having to kowtow a little bit, obviously, to the administration. And so he's telling everybody else, hey, we don't care if you don't like tariffs. They're coming, and you just better get ready. Interest rates are something that are once again on the move and behaving in ways that are not consistent with what we've seen in the past 3 years or so. So we'll talk about that as well. And we've also got to worry a little bit about the government budget now too, because we've got a new, well, I don't know if we can officially call it an agency, but this is the DOGE, which is the Elon Musk campaign, right? Where he's supposedly going to go through the government budget and extract waste, right? It's not clear, honestly, that he really understands the government budget, which wouldn't be surprising because not many people do. And so we'll get into all of those things. I'll try to keep my comments neutral, but at times, like I said, it's not going to be easy. And just understand that I'm not alone in this. There's a lot going on now, and a lot that we're talking about that no academic economist ever, or even policy economist would never advocate, right? And so it's going to be interesting. Let's just put it that way. So let's just look at this. Despite the fact that we just had an election that seemed to be determined by people who are disgruntled about the economy, we have pretty much the strongest economy in the world. In fact, it's the strongest economy in the world. Okay. But when you survey people, as we know, they think it's terrible. I mean, obviously we had high inflation, right? And that seems to matter quite strongly to people's attitudes about the economy. In fact, there are two things that seem to matter to people, and when they make their voting decisions, a lot of people in America, the price of gas and the overall inflation rate. And those two things are related to each other. Okay. And so the perception was that the economy was not doing well. At the same time, this is a perception worldwide. Okay, it's not unique to the United States, and I'm going to show you a graph soon that's kind of shocking, actually. Okay, incumbent governments are being turned out of office everywhere. That's the chart I'm going to show you here soon when we get through all the bullet points. inflation in the United States went obviously dramatically higher than we're used to as in the aftermath of the pandemic. That was again a worldwide phenomenon. It wasn't just here; it was everywhere. Okay, and that inflation rate has come down in the United States. It started coming down earlier, and it came down more than it did anywhere else in the world. Okay, but they still have not achieved, the Fed, I'm sorry, the Fed has not achieved their 2% inflation target. They're kind of stuck, right? And inflation has started creeping upwards a little bit. And so whether they're going to attempt to achieve that 2% target or not is suddenly becoming an issue, right? But why is our economy so much better than the rest of the world? I mean, what about China? What about Europe? China's having difficulties, right? We haven't been able to say that for very long. Their population is already falling. Okay, the population of the world is projected to start falling in about 50 years. Okay, but some countries are still growing. The United States population growth rate is still positive, but many other economies, in Europe in particular, we're starting to see the population decline because birth rates have not kept up with replacement. And China, of course, has been the largest country in the world forever, and they had a one-child policy for so long because they were trying to combat overpopulation. And that, combined with the fact that there's a distinct preference for male children to this day in their culture, has led to a birth rate that is well below replacement, and their population has started to fall already. This is a problem, right? For any capitalist economy, in order to grow, there are two things that matter. Your labor force needs to be growing, and your productivity needs to be growing. Those two things balance out, and they create your overall growth rate. So if your population is falling, your labor force is therefore falling, and that's not good for overall economic growth. Meanwhile, the real estate sector, basically the source of household wealth. That's true in any economy, right? I mean, once you get out of the top 5 or 10%, people don't own a lot of stocks and bonds, but they may own a house. And the real estate sector, or the housing sector, then, is that much more important everywhere in the world. So the real estate sector in China has essentially collapsed. Okay, that's hurting everybody's returns and therefore their economic prospects. No one believes now the announced 5% growth rate that the government has published, right? It's not normal that you see as much reaction as we did to this particular announcement. And there are consultancies out there that try to correct it. And they're coming up with growth rates that are much lower than 5%. And there's a lot of discussion that overall the inflation rate may be negative. And they're already experiencing the effects of deflation then, right? And that's something you definitely don't want to happen to your economy. We've talked about this before. Japan is the classic example of what we call secular stagnation, an economy that can no longer really grow dynamically just because its structures changed in such a way that doesn't allow it, right? And Japanese birth rate started falling decades ago, and their economy has been suffering from the effects of deflation for over 2 decades. Okay, they're finally pulling themselves out of that now. The pandemic and the aftermath changed a lot, and that's one of the things that changed. And the Japanese inflation rate has actually been positive on a sustained basis for the last, I can't tell you how far back that goes, actually, I don't remember. Europe, right, something of a basket case. Okay, Germany, which is obviously the strongest economy, they're in recession, right? Their growth rates have been negative for most periods most quarters over the last 2 years. And the overall EU growth rate was just 1.1% in 2024. All of these things combined with our relative economic success has meant that us in Europe, us in the UK, it's been growing and growing and growing over time. There's no disputing that the United States economy is the richest economy in the world. Okay, and it's becoming more so as we speak. Hang on a second. We're living in we're always living in an uncertain macroeconomic environment, but now because of the change in administration, the whole world has changed, right? And this is going to have impacts that we don't necessarily understand. Are we going to get import tariffs? Yes. How high are they going to be? We're starting to reach some sort of decision on that, I believe. Last I heard, 10% on everything from China, 25% from anything from Canada and Mexico. Those are punitive levels. There's it's intended to be some sort of a punishment. Okay, but how's that going to affect us is really with the question. Also, we'll talk about that. Dramatic cuts in government spending. Okay, immigration raids and deportations. If you believe what you read in social media, it's already going on. Okay, deregulation, and especially the deregulation that's probably coming in financial markets. That is a concern for the stability of our financial system. And it's looking a little bit dodgy, let's put it that way. And hopefully at the end we'll have a little bit more time to talk about that, but I don't have anything in my slides specifically about that. The strong dollar, right, has reemerged. We've talked about this before. The dollar has been very strong for going on, over 10 years. Okay, but it had finally started to weaken a little bit. Okay, and now it's all turned around again, and the dollar has strengthened vis-a-vis almost every currency in the world fairly dramatically over the last year or so. Okay, but if the dollar is strong, it makes it harder for us to export to other countries. Our exports will be more expensive the stronger the dollar is. And it also makes imports cheap. So we've got a dollar value that's encouraging imports into the United States, which is something that the Trump administration is trying to stop using tariffs. So, we've got contradictory effects going on here. And the focus sometimes just doesn't seem to it doesn't make sense to most economists to be talking about some of these things. But like I said, we don't have any choice. I just want to make clear that, once again, that there's a general perception, we call it a myth in economics, that everything is always better under Republican administrations. If you surveyed people before this last presidential election and you asked them who's better for the economy, it was pretty much overwhelming that it was Trump. Okay, this is a perception that people have always had, right? And so all I'm going to do is show you the data. Okay, this is real GDP growth in the first Trump administration. Okay, these are pretty decent growth rates for a modern, sophisticated economy like ours. Notice that this is the 3% line right here, because the scale on the next graph is different from this, right? And so it's going to look a little bit different, but just notice where the 3% line is, and it allows us to make comparisons. So here it is under the Biden administration. It goes a little bit longer because the Trump administration, we didn't include the pandemic. Okay, so here we are, and here's the 3% line now. Okay, so even if we eliminate these first two as being related to the opening of the economy, this was the Fed starting to raise interest rates. Okay, and the Omicron variant hit right about this time, and the economy started to slow down again, probably mostly because of what the Fed was doing. But then, right, policy kicked in. The growth rate's basically no different under Biden than it was under Trump. Okay, and so that's a pattern that emerges over and over again in the data. It's almost as if who's president doesn't really matter to the growth rate. Okay, but you didn't hear me say that. Okay, so this was the graph I was talking to you about. Voters are pissed off everywhere. This is really interesting data. Okay, these are the election results in developed economies. So each dot on this graph, this is going all the way back to 1900, each dot on this graph represents, right, how the vote share changed, right, in a particular election. All right, so did the incumbent get a higher vote share or not, right? And so here we are with the incumbent in this particular election, whatever country this is, right? They had gotten about 11% more of the vote than they had in the previous election. Okay, and so the whole point of this, the black dots are the averages over all the countries. And as you can see, there's more and more countries as you move out in time. Look over here. This is the latest elections in developing, or sorry, into, God, Jesus, sorry, into developed economies. Okay, here's the average way down here. There's not a single dot above the zero line. Every single incumbent party in every developed economy in the world lost vote share in their most recent elections. So it was not unique to the United States, right? We're throwing the incumbent regimes out everywhere in the developed world, which is a fascinating phenomenon, right? That I don't understand the impacts of, but like we've never seen anything like that. All right, so let's look at the labor. Let's look at the evidence that this economy is doing so well. Okay, one of them is labor markets. This is the unemployment rate going all the way back to 1968, just for historical comparisons, so that you can see that we remain at a really historically low unemployment rate. It's crept upwards a little bit since the trough, which was about 3.2%, I believe, in the Biden administration, right? As low as it's ever been, except if you go back into the 1950s. Okay, but since then it started to increase a little bit, as you can see here. This is the pandemic spike, obviously. Okay, here's the Great Recession and global financial crisis. Here's that spike, right? Here's the Volcker Fed spike in the 1980s. Pandemic was more dramatic than any of them, but it didn't last nearly as long. That was the effects of policy. Okay, and so now you see the unemployment rate is starting to increase, which is, not a good thing typically, but employment is going up. Now we're only going back to 2015, not all the way to 1968. So I haven't shown you, there's no point really in going back to 68. This is just to show recent trends. This was total non-farm employment in the United States increasing at a nice linear trend like it typically does historically. And then it collapses in the pandemic. It's had to recover, and we're back growing on a very close to what the previous trend was, right? So people are getting more and more jobs, right, are being created. People are taking those jobs, and that's been increasing steadily since the pandemic, with one little swoon right here, as you can see. So that doesn't seem to indicate that the unemployment rate should be going up. Okay, people are getting jobs, right? It says so right here. Well, participation is also going up. Labor force participation, and this goes back to some stuff we've talked about before, okay, where the unemployment rate is essentially determined by two things: how many people are getting jobs, and how many people are looking for jobs as opposed to dropping out of the labor force. So if you're actually unemployed but actively seeking work, you're part of the labor force. So the labor force is people with jobs plus people that are actively looking for jobs. Okay, and we have a lot more people actively looking for jobs now than we did a few years ago. And that's the reason why the unemployment rate goes up. This is what economists would call an increase in the unemployment rate that's not necessarily due to what we would consider bad reasons. We wanted people coming back to the labor force. They dropped out during the pandemic. Okay, the fact that they've come back and started looking for jobs means that the unemployment rate would be higher than otherwise, but it's not a bad thing at all. Okay, and so we've got an increasing unemployment rate, but it's the labor market remains solid, right? If maybe even better than that, we could consider it. Okay, because immigration is such a hot topic nowadays, what about the impact on labor force of immigrants, right? And economists are very clear in talking about what's about to happen is, by definition, one of the biggest labor market shocks that this economy will have ever suffered. If we are really going to go around and start rounding up illegal immigrants that are working in feedlots and construction sites and things like that, and we're going to kick them out, this is going to be a massive reduction in employment and in the labor force. So this graph is showing you, okay, labor force participation rate by immigration status. Okay, so here's Black as U.S. natives, right? That's me. Okay, so, and you can see the effect of the pandemic right here. Okay, participation drops off dramatically in all these categories. It drops off dramatically. It's recovered, but not fully, not all the way to where it was. Okay, whereas non-recent immigrants, so people that have been here a while, okay, here's their labor force participation. And I guess this is maybe confirmation of one thing that Elon Musk has said lately. Like they work harder, right? These foreigners work harder. We got to, we don't want to hire Americans. We want to hire people with H-1B visas because they're going to work harder for us. And this is kind of at least somewhat some indication that there may be something true to that. Okay, I mean, I don't want to take that too far, obviously. And then here are the recent immigrants. Why there's such an upward trend, I'm not sure. That is something that I can't explain. But you can see since the pandemic, right, labor force participation for recent immigrants has been averaging much higher than it was before, and it's higher than overall, or higher for natives than it is for natives. So, right, these are the people who are going to get some of them deported. Okay, and once they're gone, right, this labor force participation that we see that is on average so high, okay, it's going to be gone. Okay, these people are going to be taken out of the labor force, and they've been participating at a very high level based compared to what they did historically. Here's the unemployment rate by immigration status from the same publication. Okay, and here we are. U.S. natives have the lowest unemployment rate during the pandemic, as you can see, right? It's spiked up, but it spiked up less for the black line. Now, as we come down to more recent times, it's the U.S. natives have, I mean, it's almost identical to the non-recent immigrant unemployment rate. Okay, but there is a slight difference, and it looks like the unemployment rate for non-recent immigrants is a little bit lower. Okay, but for recent immigrants, look at that. The unemployment rate is much higher. Okay, these are people who are looking for work, right? They have to be actively seeking work to be counted as unemployed to begin with. Okay, and there are a lot of them. And this increase may be what people are complaining about, right? I mean, we got more and more immigrants have come in. I don't have a chart to show you that, but actually I do. It's at the end of the slide, very back of the slides, and not part of the main presentation, because I thought I was gonna run out of time if I went to, and I am. And so you can see that the unemployment rate here is a little bit lower for people that have been here for a while, and the immigrant unemployment rate is much higher and has been increasing over time. Okay, so are they taking our jobs? Yes and no, right? Some of them are, but their unemployment rate has been trending upwards over time since it fell after the pandemic. And that's indication that some of these people are not finding jobs, even though they're actively seeking them. Okay, so the bottom line that I wanted to get across from this part of the discussion is just how big of a shock we're about to experience. Okay, it's going to be, if the Trump administration truly follows through, if we are talking mass roundups, right? The state of Texas offered the federal government some big ranch where they can build one of their camps to keep all these people. If we really follow through with that sort of thing, it's going to be a massive shock to our labor market. And nobody really knows exactly what happens from something like that because nobody's ever seen it before. Okay, strong dollar. Okay, I haven't got a whole lot on this. I just want to make sure that you understand that the dollar has once again strengthened vis-a-vis most of the currencies of the world. Here's an example. These are G10 currencies. Okay, so these are typically big market economies, although they're not all big. They're market economies anyway, and they're sort of part of the more sophisticated group that comprises the G10. I guess that's how you can put it. The British pound has lost value versus the dollar at the lowest rate of all, but it definitely has lost value. The euro, Swiss franc, all the way down to the New Zealand dollar. The dollar has strengthened vis-a-vis all of these. Okay, so I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of Norwegian or Kiwi tourists. It's much more expensive for them to come to the United States as a result of all of this. Tourism is an export. Our exports have become more expensive. Okay, that's not good for our manufacturing sector. And we've been very worried about our manufacturing sector and the fact that so many industries have picked up and moved overseas. Okay, well, a strong dollar is going to contribute to that. Okay, and so where this goes, we're not sure. There are sometimes, let me start over again. I don't think you're going to find very many policymakers that think that the strength of the dollar now is necessarily a good thing for the global economy. It's happened once before that the strong dollar was causing trouble for the overall economy. And in the 1970s, we got something called the Plaza Accord, which was a concerted, a coordinated effort by central banks around the world to bring the value of the dollar down. Okay, it actually worked in that case, we think. At least the dollar did lose value as a result of well, let's say at the time they were doing that, the dollar did lose value. Assessing causality is really difficult in these things, but most people credit the policy, the Plaza Accord, with successfully weakening the dollar. Normally, when there are these coordinated interventions, right, the market works against the governments that are trying to impose their will, and nothing happens. You know, you're trying to change the value of your currency. You're intervening in foreign exchange markets where those things are traded and where their value is determined, and nothing happens. Okay, because the private sector is countering your every move, right? And so they wind up wasting a lot of money trying to change the value of the currency, and it doesn't go anywhere. So whether we're going to get anything like that now, who knows, right? The strong dollar has been a problem for a long time. It looked like it was starting to go away, and then it's now back. So there's a lot of discussion about this in sort of trade markets and international finance markets, because when the dollar gets too strong, imbalances in the global economy start to emerge. Okay, and so here's another assessment of the dollar's value. This is just an exchange rate index. And so what we do quite often to assess the value of the dollar against a basket of other currencies around the world, okay, they'll create an index, right? And so in the year that they start that index, it'll be equal to 100. So obviously this one goes back, they started this one back before. Okay, and so if your number's above 100, the dollar is stronger than it was when it was 100. If you're below 100, the dollar is weaker. Okay, and this data goes back to 1960. Look where we are. As long as this data has been available, right, we're at the highest value of the dollar we've ever seen. Okay, like I said, that could possibly lead to imbalances in the global economy. Stay tuned. It's not clear, honestly, where this administration is going to come down on this, right? And whether they're going to behave as previous administrations would have in trying to coordinate with other countries, right? It may be that it's just the Fed that does this, and maybe they don't need the administration on board, but that's unlikely. The Treasury is almost certain to be involved in all of this, and that means the Trump administration. So what they think of this, we don't know. What they might do about it, we don't know. Okay, but it's becoming more and more of a problem for the global economy. Okay, so let's talk about tariffs a little bit. I've managed to not bring any source of time. 3:30. Okay, we're still good for that. The effects of import tariffs, and this has kind of a funny story to it, because I spent a lot of time earlier this week because I couldn't find a good graphical treatment, a good simplified model like we would teach in an economics class. I couldn't find a good one, so I had to start from scratch, and I drew this right as a starting point, and then the next slide was going to show you the effects of tariffs, and it took me forever to do it because you got to highlight certain areas and all this stuff. But anyway, you'll see in a minute what happened. This is intended, I mean, this is oversimplified, as all textbook models are, but it gets the point across. Okay, it's not going to get the point across in terms of magnitudes or anything like that. It's just a general sketch of a story that tells what the effects of import tariffs are. So this is just going to be overall. Let's just say there's one good in the United States that's represented by this model: electric cars, whatever. Okay, and so here's the demand curve for people in the U.S. for electric cars, right? These are customers, these are consumers. Consumers don't like high prices. So if the price is high, you're not going to sell that much. Okay, and then over here are the producers. That's what's represented by the supply curve. Excuse me. Right, and so suppliers like companies like high prices, right? So the higher the price goes, the more they're going to be willing to supply. And everybody knows from your previous Econ 101 class that the equilibrium occurs where quantity supplied and quantity demand are equal right here. And that would generate an equilibrium price that's not shown on the graph and an equilibrium quantity. Now, what's going on here? Okay, well, this is a traded good now. Now we're talking about a good that's traded across borders. And there are other countries that produce it. So it's not just the United States that has the suppliers, right? And the world price is then lower what the price would be in the United States. Okay, China can produce EVs a lot cheaper than us, so they're going to sell them at a lower price than we would be able to. Okay, and so instead of a price up here, consumers in the United States are paying the world price, right, which is lower. Okay, at that price, American firms are willing to produce Q1. That's what the supply curve tells us, right? They're going to cut back from where they would have been because price is too low, right? Whereas for the customers, the demanders, you and me, right? If the price is this low, our quantity demanded is going to be all the way up here. We like low prices and we're going to buy more. That's what the debt demand curve tells us. Okay, and so what happens now is because where PW intersects the supply curve, it's telling us that there are companies in the US, only some companies in the US, those that typically have low cost, are going to be willing to produce electric cars at that price. Okay, so that's why when you read off the supply curve, if the price is PW, companies would only produce Q1. Okay, because price is too low and they don't like low prices. But we like low prices, and at a price of PW, we're going to demand a lot more than what firms are willing to produce. Okay, and so at PW, the quantity demanded of electric vehicles by Americans is going to be Q2. So this is what we call excess demand. That distance right there. Let me go back one more time. This is excess demand. If price is too low, demand exceeds supply. Where are we going to get the additional units? We're going to import them. Okay, and the imports are also coming in at PW. So if this is US production and this is US consumption, this must be total imports. Okay, so now let's impose a tariff. And this is where I spent a lot of time putting this diagram that you're about to see together, and then I came across a source that had it in there. The exact same diagram I was drawing was in somebody else's publication, done by professionals, so we're going to look at theirs. This is the same graph. Okay, price is on the vertical axis, quantity on the horizontal axis. Supply is upward sloping, demand is downward sloping. They've got the supply curve going through the origin. That's neither here nor there to anything that we're talking about. All right, so here was our world price in the other graph. Now there's a tariff. Every unit imported is now subject to a tariff. So that increases the price. Okay, we're now going to be at a price up here, this dotted line. We went up from this dotted line to this dotted line. Okay, now there's one thing that I didn't tell you yet, and I'm going to go back to this graph. Okay, this is a little trickier. Okay, we have a concept in economics called consumer surplus. You don't need to know that specifically at all. What it means is if somebody is if you're buying something at PW, if there's a point on your demand curve up here, remember, demand curves represent the preferences of the people in the economy. So if we have a demand curve with points all the way up here, it means that there's somebody in the economy that's willing to pay that amount to buy, say, the first unit of this good. And so as we move down the demand, picking up people that have with what we call a willingness to pay that is lower and lower and lower. Okay, so think about this. Everybody's paying PW. Somebody in this economy is willing to pay this high price up here where my cursor is. All of this then is a surplus to them, right? I'm willing to pay $100, but I only have to pay 20. I get a surplus of $80 for that. Okay, and when you add up all of those, at PW, this is what we call consumer surplus. Okay, this triangle, the bigger it is, the greater is consumer welfare. So the fact that prices is lower than it would be in the United States is good for consumers. Okay, the triangle would have only been this big if we didn't have trade, but with a world price down here, my triangle is this big thing here. Consumers are benefiting. Producers, on the other hand, are not. They're being hurt. The producer surplus is this triangle right here. Okay? There are firms in this economy that are willing to produce at a price way down here where my cursor is, or else we wouldn't have a supply curve here. Okay, the fact that they're getting paid PW, okay, that's a surplus to them. I mean, you can think of that as profit. It's not exactly profit, but it's close enough, right? Their cost, there's a firm down here whose costs are so low, they're willing to supply for a really low price, but they're getting PW for every unit they sell. So the difference is a welfare gain to them. I could produce at $10, but I'm getting $100. That's a $90 surplus to me. So the producer surplus, adding them all up in the US, remember, the US only produces up to Q1. Right now, the producer surplus is this triangle. So we got consumer surplus is this big one. Producer surplus is this little one, so long as we've got a tariff in place. Okay, that leads us to discussion over here. Okay, notice what's going on. We've increased the price with a tariff. We've taken away some consumer welfare. Remember that it was this whole big triangle that was welfare for consumers. Now that we've increased the price, the triangle is shifted. Consumer surplus is smaller. Producer surplus, on the other hand, has grown. Remember, it was just this little triangle down here before. Now that we've imposed a tariff and increased the price, producer surplus is a bigger triangle here because they're earning a higher price for every unit that they sell. Okay, so the point of this diagram is to show you this amount right here is going to be tax revenue, right? How much did the price go up? It went up by the amount of the tariff. How much are we now going to be consuming? Well, now it's going to be Q2 and Q3 that matter, not Q1 and Q4. Okay, so tax revenue will be this amount, right? And then this is what we call a deadweight loss in economics. Okay, remember the sizes of the triangles. They've shrunk. Those triangles were a measure of the welfare of consumers and producers or firms or companies, respectively. We've now taken away some of that total welfare by imposing this tariff. All of this is lost to society. This is called the deadweight loss. You may have heard of it if you took economics before. In more sophisticated versions, it's called Harburger triangles. Okay, named after a particular economist who was concerned with this issue. So the whole fundamental conclusions are actually the other effects. Let's start down at the second bullet. Okay, well, if people were buying American produced goods before the tariff, and after the tariff, they produce foreign goods instead because they're relatively cheaper, that has a cost to society. Okay, both were available. I could have bought my EV from an American company or say a European company. They're both available. Okay. And so when we put a tariff on, and people have chosen to buy the American ones. Now that we put a tariff on, okay, we're going to have to consume more of our own stuff that people didn't want. There was probably a reason, right? You're going to put a tariff on electric vehicles coming from Europe or from China. Okay, that's going to move everybody towards United States produced electric vehicles, right? But we weren't buying some of those beforehand. We were buying them abroad. Now we can't. Now those ones from abroad are more expensive. We're going to be forced to buy things that we don't demand as much. And imagine that you're importing something that's got a new technology in it, right? That technology was produced in the United States, right? And the one produced in the United States is probably more efficient, higher quality. Okay, now we're gonna, or sorry, I got that exactly backwards. We were buying it from somebody abroad. Excuse me. We're buying it from somebody abroad, presumably because they can do it better. Okay, and now we're raising the price on the ones that you're buying from abroad, and so people are going to substitute for domestic. Okay, so now you're going to, instead of buying French wine, you're going to buy California wine, which isn't a fair comparison, we know, but something that's considered inferior, that's produced in the United States, lower efficiency maybe, right? We're going to be gravitating towards those, right? And that's going to have an efficiency cost for us. Okay, the deadweight loss is real. Tariffs make prices go up, right? That's inflationary. Now, if they go up in a way that winds up killing people's purchases, prices are so high, I don't want to buy it anymore now, right? We may actually find ourselves in a situation with high inflation and low GDP, low output. That's called stagflation. We've been through it before. Never because of tariffs, right? It was about oil prices back in the day, but this could be a new source of stagflation. Tariffs make prices go up. They also kill demand. How much does demand get killed is an open question. Okay, and if demand gets killed enough, we're going to be producing and consuming less stuff. That's a recession. Higher prices, higher inflation, lower output. That's a different type of recession than we normally see. We've only seen that in the 70s. We may see it again. Okay, and so this is a little bit dated, but we do have estimates. The problem with this is it's May 2024, and the tariff experiments that they're putting into their model are not consistent necessarily with what's going on with what the Trump administration is discussing right now. But what they've done is you can go back, you can see what the effects of the U.S.-China trade war were 2018 to 2019. Okay, and you can see we lost 4% of GDP because of that, 0.4%, excuse me. It doesn't sound like much, but every bit matters. Okay, here are their estimates for what the impact would be of a 10% across the board tariff. Okay, that's 9% of our imports would be affected by that. Okay, the across the board as a share of GDP, those imports are 9.8% of our economy. The average import price increase is 10%. The amount of the tariff, how much would that cost us in terms of GDP? 1%. Okay, that's a real number. I mean, when we're talking about growth rates of GDP that are typically around 2%, that's half of the growth rate right there. Okay, you're going to cut the growth rate in half. All right, and then there are these other experiments as well where you can see the impacts of those. I don't want to, I mean, there's a lot that underlies all of this, and mostly this was just to show you that we have estimates of the costs of tariffs. None of these are as precise as they should be with respect to the plans of the current Trump administration, because they didn't know when they did this. But the basic result is these things have costs on society, and we can measure them. Okay, here is another look at this, because at the same time that we're going to have tariffs going up, we're also going to have regressive tax increases. Okay, the Trump tax cut is almost surely to be extended, the one that was passed in 2017. Okay, and as usual, they only ran it out to the end of the next administration. And so now they're talking about renewing all of that and extending the tax cuts. Well, everybody knows, I'm sure, from the discussion that went on back then, that those tax cuts were tilted towards the wealthy. And they're going to be again if they just extend them. And so this is showing you what the impacts on different groups in the income distribution. So we have income distributed in the United States. We got poor people, we got rich people. Think of it that way. We divide them up into quintiles or deciles. This one is done by quintiles, right? So each quintile is 20% of the population. Okay, the lowest quintile are the poorest people in society. Second quintile is the next step up. Here's the top quintile, and they've been so kind as to give us just the top 1% here as well. Okay, so this is showing you what the total impact on your household consumption would be for people in each of these groups. Okay, one thing that drives all of this that we've talked about before is that lower income people consume more of their income than do higher income people. So if you're trying to stimulate an economy, right, you want to tilt the policy towards lower income people, because by them taking those benefits and spending them, that's what stimulates the economy. If you give Warren Buffett a tax cut, he doesn't do anything with it, right? He's just, he's got plenty of money already. It's not like he says, oh, I can finally afford that motorcycle I wanted. Or anything like that, right? And so the underlying all of that are estimates of what we call the marginal propensity to consume. If I give you $1 of income, how much of it do you can consume versus save? And the marginal propensity to consume is higher for lower income people. Okay, and so here's it's the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. That's the Trump tax cut, which was in 2017. They're looking at the impact on 2018. Here is the change if we extend it. Okay, so these are just due to the tax changes. And then this is the tariffs right here. Okay, what the impacts are going to be on these different groups. So the net effect of all of of what's going to happen, right? I mean, because if you give people a tax cut, they're going to spend more money. That's good for the economy. Okay, but at the same time, they're giving the lowest proportion to the lowest income people. So the impact on spending is not going to be that great because they're not getting much of a tax break. Okay, so 0.5% is the tax break, is the effect on consumption. If they extend it to the Trump tax cuts, then this is the decline in consumption from the tariffs. Prices are going up, right? People are going to buy less stuff, right? And that's what this is showing. So the net effect, right? They've got another graph showing this, but it's kind of overkill. The net effect of the two policies together is just the sum of the red bar and the orange bar. So in the lowest quintile, it's going to be minus 3.7% if both the tax cuts are extended and the tariffs are imposed. Okay, and it's much worse, as you can see, on the lowest income group in society, right? And the impact is going to get lower and lower and lower as you move out the income distribution. So we're targeting the wrong people. If the whole idea is to try to stimulate the economy with this, which I understand it probably isn't, but normally that would be the goal. Okay, then we're doing it wrong. Okay, and there's no telling where this is going to lead now. Okay, so I think that may have gotten a little technical. I'm not sure if that all came across. Tariffs have costs. The costs are going to be higher on lower income people, even though they're going to be part of the tax cut that's going to be extended also. Okay, and so we only got 10 minutes. The interest rates redux section is going over some stuff that we've done before. Okay, and the basic message, why don't we, I'll try to go through this relatively quickly. I'm going to skip the technical stuff. This is the 10-year treasury yield going back to 1962 and up to the most recent month that we've got data, recent day, actually. So, 17th of January was the most recent data point as of a couple of days ago when I put this together. Okay, and we've seen this before, and I've always described it as a graph that you don't see graphs like this very often in economics, right? There was what we would call a secular trend And remember, all interest rates were doing this at the same time, not just this one. Okay, secular increase in the 10-year yield, right, all the way up to the early 80s when the Volcker Fed stepped in and did some pretty extreme things. And from there, the trajectory started going downward. And it just kept going and kept going. I mean, obviously, there's some fits and starts in this, right? But the trend was downward, 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 all the way to the pandemic, really. Okay, and then after the pandemic, we seem to have entered a new economic regime. Don't necessarily understand why exactly, but interest rates started to go up. Obviously, the Fed increased interest rates, but the Fed does not control the 10-year bond yield, right? The Fed controls very short-term policy interest rates. And so when they raise or lower their policy interest rates, long-term rates may or may not respond in the same direction. And that's exactly what's happened recently. So why don't we just skip to that? There's a lot of detail in here that with stuff that those of you that did your homework in previous years, you'll understand what's going on there, right? Let's just go to this graph real quick because you've seen this one before, right? I updated this by 2 or 3 years. These are the determinants of it. So that this is the 10-year treasury yield, right? And there are these different components that make up the yield. So in the 1990s, the yield was around 77%. That was 2%, the underlying real interest rate. 3% of it was expected inflation. Interest rates are higher if people expect the inflation rate to be higher. Why? Because the inflation rate's eating away the value of your money, right? If I take $10 and put it in the bank, right, and the inflation rate is 10%, let's put it, I take $10, I put it in the bank at a 5% interest rate. Let's make it $100 to make the math easier. $100 in the bank at a 5% interest rate. At the end of the year, I'm going to have $105. But if inflation was running at 3%, it's lost 3% of its purchasing interest rate we're talking about here. Then expected inflation was contributing 3%. And then, of course, there's this mysterious thing called the term premium, which says that longer term bonds should sell at a higher interest, should trade at a higher interest rate, okay, than shorter term bonds. And the difference was called the term premium. Okay, and we saw that the stuff didn't really work, right? So here's the 7% in the 90s. In 2020, we did an example then. Okay, and we had negative term premium. Anyway, this is getting kind of technical. The whole point of this graph is to show you that these things aren't adding up anymore. Okay, this should add up to this. This should add up to this. This should add up to this. Well, now it's not. Okay, 2.2 plus 2.4 is 4.6. What happened to this 0.7? This is the term premium, the additional compensation for holding a 10-year bond instead of a shorter term bond. But the problem with our theories of finance is this is the term premium is capturing anything that might be causing the interest rate to not equal what it's supposed to. So anytime the interest rate is not adding up to the sum of its determinants, people look at the term premium as being the culprit. And we don't necessarily understand it, Phil. I know sounds amazing, but it's true. We don't necessarily understand what drives that number. Okay, obviously there's some perception of risk that's in there, but there are other things as well. So what about this 0.7% term premium that we see in the data, but doesn't seem to be showing up? Right, in the actual, this is what Paul Krugman, who has recently retired as a columnist from the New York Times, Nobel laureate in economics, right? So he obviously knows his stuff. Right? He calls it the idiot premium. He says it might be an idiot premium and that markets are truly worried about the impact of what the Trump administration is going to do. Well, they have all these ideas that traditionally are bad for the economy. Okay, and so why would we impose things that we know are bad in the economy? And it's not a very graceful phrase. I probably could choose something different there, but he's pretty hard on every administration. So we don't know. Okay, we don't know what's going. Interest rates are behaving in ways we don't necessarily understand to a certain degree. Okay, and we don't know why that's going on. But let me show you the yield curve. We made a big deal in these sessions over time about the yield curve being negatively sloped. Okay, this is the yield curve tells you as you move out the maturity spectrum, and this is all for treasuries. So this is the safe interest rate, right? 1 month, 2 month, 3 month, 4 month. These are all maturities that treasuries are issued at. And here's the yield. And normally the yield curve, okay, which just connects all the different yields at the different maturities, is upward sloping, right? But it's been downward sloping for a good 3 years. And traditionally, that was a sign of an impending recession, which is why, if you think back to 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when we were having these meetings, the recession was, we were just on the cusp of a recession, right? Everything was flashing recession, 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 and then it never came. Okay, so the inverted yield curve, as they call it, has not been a predictor of recessions like it was historically that we talked about before, and I'll show you that for a second. I'm sorry I'm rushing. I only got 3 minutes. All right, so what's the point of this? We have a yield curve that's starting to look normal. Okay, the Fed, right, has a lot of influence over these short-term rates down here using policy. The longer-term rates respond to market forces. Okay, and so what they're saying, that the Fed has brought these short-term rates down using policy, and the response of the longer-term rates has been to go up. This is why you're not seeing mortgage rates come down. Okay, the Fed has been lowering its own target interest rates, and mortgage rates have not come down. In fact, they may have even gone up. Okay, that's the yield curve in action right there. Okay, so it's looking more normal, but that's not necessarily good news for everybody. Okay, obviously, because higher interest rates mean people can't afford houses, right? And that's been probably the most salient effect. Anyway, I'm going to stop there because it's 2 minutes to 4. I apologize for rushing through those last 2 topics, and I doubt I got across everything that I should have gotten across with all of that, and I hope I didn't lose people. But since we've only got 2 minutes, I don't know what you want to do. Do you want me to answer questions? And I apologize for not giving any more time.
Do you have any questions, Carl?
So you actually believe what you're saying?
I like. Can you be specific about what it was?
Go back to your supply and demand curve.
Oh, okay.
Right, the next one. So in isolation, I completely agree. But the demand curve does not stay the same when tariffs get applied. Because what are you going to do with that additional tax revenue? You're going to float it back to the people. And who's going to get it? It's going to come in the form of jobs.
No, you're going to use it to reduce income taxes. They're going to use it to reduce income taxes. That's what he said.
Yeah, and so not only that, but I view tariffs as primarily, I'm going to create a nuclear bomb. And that nuclear bomb, I'm never going to use it. Why am I building a nuclear bomb? Because I'm going to protect my assets in such a way that you're going to respect me, and you're not going to charge me 100% tariffs in your country when you don't accept my cars. So the whole rationale that demand curve stays the same and the supply curve differs when a tariff gets applied. In isolation,
no, that's not true.
Yeah,
there's more than one way. Thank you very much for that. I assure you that there are different ways of modeling tariffs. And yes, we could have shifted demand curves. We could have shifted supply curves, but that's not the framework that was going to give us any particular useful insights here. Yes, there are other motives for imposing tariffs, if that's what you're talking about. Clearly, it's not about economic efficiency here, right? There are other things, punitive actions going on where the Trump administration wants to punish other countries for perceived slights. Okay, and so do you want to use tariffs for that? That's your prerogative, but it's not an efficient economic policy at all. And so the answer to the first question is, yeah, I believe this. I think it's a little bit oversimplified. It doesn't get into all the nitty gritty, but obviously this is an economic model that's used over and over and over again, right? Not just by me. This isn't even my diagram, as I told you.
Yeah.
So
No, I get it. But in
you,
isolation, when you hold everything constant like you're doing, you're going to get the impacts of what you're referring to. I get it. I'm a school of economics. So, but it's not in isolation. And I think, quite frankly, tariffs are nothing but just a way to get people to react the right way. And if tariffs get implied, we're back to McKinley. And so what happened in McKinley? What was our income tax when McKinley was president?
there was no income tax when McKinley was president. Yeah. All right, let's go. Let's take a look at McKinley years. Oh, I don't have it. Okay. I mean,
I just wanted to create a little debate.
If we're going back to the
I'm
McKinley years, we're talking, that's not even a modern economy we're talking about. I don't think that this is an argument. I mean, it's about ideology, obviously, and I don't think that's what I'm here for. So anyway, Karen has a question too, I see.
Yeah. Hi. Enjoyed the information.
Thank you.
Question. When you mentioned the piece about potential mass deportations, from your perspective, from your research, just from your history, has it been that Americans won't do certain jobs, or is it that Americans won't do those jobs because the wage is not, it's not fair and it's not representative of a living wage, and illegal immigrants will because they are, quote, cheaper labor. They don't have to be treated fairly. Conditions don't have to be safe. There's just a lot to the whole illegal immigration piece where I don't know if it's that Americans won't do the jobs. It's just that I think we or need a little bit more in order to sustain, right?
Yes.
That was my thought on that.
Yeah, I can't give you answers on magnitudes of those effects. I don't think anybody really knows. But yeah, I mean, how much is it going to cost to get somebody like, you or me to go pick lettuce? It's going to be costly, right? And immigrants will obviously do it at a cheaper price. And that's just the reality that we face in a global economy. Okay, it's true everywhere. And we try to restrict immigration, then that obviously means that there isn't as much low wage labor, right? But I can't necessarily answer your question because we don't know what it's going to take to get American workers into the fields, right? Are they going to be willing to bend over at the waist for 12 hours a day and all these things that farm laborers go through? I don't have a good answer to that. I'm sorry, but I think that's the basic issue, obviously, isn't it? More than anything, the debate has been about higher technology type jobs. The H-1B visas have been more of a topic, and there, I don't think there's any doubt that we have evidence that companies have laid off American workers and then replaced them with H-1B visa applicants that are earning lower wages. Whether there was a quality difference or not, nobody ever really tells us. Okay, well, I don't
think it is. I think it really is about cheaper labor, and I think the visa issue is cheaper labor as well. And I think there was a state, I can't remember which one, like everybody can Google it, but I want to say it was like a chicken plant that had all these illegal workers. They were raided. They had to release the illegal workers, and then they had to hire people in the community at a higher wage. People applied for the jobs and started working there. There was a whole thing on it. So I just think it may be, if this happens, I would hate for anybody to be displaced, but this administration, as we know, is going to do what they want to do. So if it happens, it'll be, I think people will apply for those jobs, and it'll hold those employers accountable to treat people properly and pay people fairly. But we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, that's obviously one of the most important questions about it. Can we get American workers to do these jobs if we don't have immigrants to do it? And I don't know the example you're talking about, but I'd like to find it. And so that's at least we got one answer there. So,
I'll look for it. I want to say it was Purdue chicken. I think it was like a
Mhm.
chicken plant.
Mhm.
I'll look it up, and if I find it, I'll share it tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. A quick question for you, Michael. I guess a comment and a question. And the comment first, real quick, is America is the strongest economy in the world. We've got our issues. You talked about Europe. Europe's a basket case. You look at Germany in recession. We don't know what's going on over there. I'll take America any day. That's the comment. I guess beyond that, though, tariffs is the hot topic button right now. But maybe can you talk about tariffs versus other trade restrictions, because there are a lot of other things that impede free trade, right? That are in place, that it's a lot deeper than just tariffs, and maybe tariffs is the quickest route to get to changing behavior. And I'm thinking of Europe and some of the other things what Carl was talking about.
There are other things that, I mean, there are certainly quotas. There are regulatory things that prevent imports from certain countries coming in because they haven't done it the way our regulations specify that they're supposed to do it. All of those are real in the global economy. One of the tariffs versus quotas question is something of a classic economic problem that if you take a class in international trade, that's one of the things that they model and try to teach you, et cetera. And the basic, and again, we have to start in a vacuum with economic models, and in the vacuum, there's no difference. The implications of tariffs and quotas are the same. Okay, now, if there's in a real world situation, that may not be the case, obviously, but not for reasons that economists are modeling about. It might be that there's a reason why prices can't change. Maybe people don't respond to price in this market, and so adding a tariff doesn't really do anything to it. Anyway, there may be other reasons for doing one versus another. Okay, I don't know. If the motive is truly political for all of these and enhancing national security, or whatever the motivation is, those are, I mean, there's definitely more than one way to do that. Tariffs are only one potential. I mean, we have export restrictions all the time, right? And we could do that with imports as well. And so we put export restrictions on high-tech goods going to China for understandable reasons in certain cases, because they have defense applications that we're not comfortable sharing that technology with other countries, things like that. So we could do those things. I'm not going to take a stand on whether it would be good versus bad, or the fact of the matter is the Trump administration has decided it's tariffs, and that's what we're going to wind up seeing. And so I think speculating about some other policy that they might put in place that could be somewhat different, I don't think I'm going to be able to give you a good answer. It's such a complex environment, and I don't think that's what's going to happen either. I don't know if I'm answering your question, though.
Yeah, you did. It's very complex, and I don't think it's a simple answer one way or the other, right? I mean,
No,
I
it's
can't
definitely
buy a
not.
Chevy in Germany, right? I mean, so there are,
You can buy a General Motors.
there's not fair trade. That's my point that I'm getting at, right? You just
Yeah.
can't, that was the whole issue.
Oh, okay. But there's also foreign investment. Don't forget, Ford can build a factory in Europe, and that's what they've done. So there's other things that we could talk about with reference to that, but I'm just mucking up things now, so I'll leave it at that.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.